Welcome to the big Socialist Weekender. It's important we're having this event, to be honest, with all the variety of different talks and discussions that are going to be going on and have already started this morning with the sessions that have already happened. Because when you look around the world today, what you see is a world in turmoil. Part of that, amongst issues like the devastation of our planet, war, or the deepening inequality across the world between rich and poor, is the rise in racism and the far right. In the last few years, we've seen how the scapegoating of migrants and refugees and the vilification of ethnic minorities has opened a space for more racist and reactionary forces. So on the one hand, you have Viktor Orban and Jobbik in Hungary, both of which have a history of anti-Semitism and have been a part of why that's become a much more open a reality in the country than it has been before. Or you think about you can also think about the likes of the National Assembly in France, with Marine Le Pen being a serious candidate for president in the next elections in France. But this is not just limited in the West, though, either. I mean, you look at Brazil, the election of Jair Bolsonaro last year has opened the door to attacks to the rights and existence of LGBT people and indigenous communities in Brazil. But Bolsonaro's election victory was made possible, and we can't forget this, by the election of Trump, the man who fills his administration with bigots like Brett Kavanaugh and alt-righters like Steve Bannon. And what about here in the UK? After years of the hostile environment, we now have in number 10, Boris Johnson, a man who thinks it's okay to call LGBT people tank top bum boys, a man who says people from Africa are pickaninnies with watermelon smiles, or thinks it's okay to laugh at Muslim women and say that they look like letterboxes and burglars. When Boris Johnson makes comments like this, against minorities, against people who are already face discrimination in society, he effectively puts a big red target on them for attacks. So, for instance, since Boris Johnson made his comments about Muslim women, attacks against them, as though they weren't already at the forefront of hate crimes, has gone up by 375%. And this ranges from abuse on the streets to physical harassment and abuse. Now, let's be clear, racism has, of course, not gone away in society, but when we're talking about the rise in racism and the far right, we're talking about the rolling back on all the gains people have fought and won in the past against it. So to give an example, when Enoch Powell made his Rivers of Blood speech, he was kicked out of the Conservative Party for that speech appearing too racist. 50 years later, Boris Johnson, instead of being forced to resign, now enjoys premiership. And what does that look like unchallenged? It means groups like Generation Identity on our campuses, what they did in Bristol is actually dye the fountains red and put a note on it saying Enoch was right. This is what it looks like to have people like Trump and Johnson emboldening such politics. And what Johnson is effectively doing is attempting to import Trumpism into the UK by pulling the Conservative Party further to the right and acting as a link between them, the party that represents big capital, and the far right. You can see that in things like Johnson's policy to close the borders to asylum-seeking children seeking to be reunited with their families here. That's not too dissimilar, if we remember a year ago, to the horrific images of children in cages being separated from their families at the Mexican border because of Trump. Both Donald Trump and Johnson ally themselves with far-right leaders around the world, like Viktor Orban in Hungary, as I mentioned, and Matteo Salvini in Italy as well. All of this and the fact that our NHS is not for sale makes the demonstration against Trump's visit on the 3rd of December absolutely important. But more important than that is actually getting rid of Boris Johnson and this racist, rotten Tory government on Thursday, the 12th of December. December. Got it right the first time. All they've given us is years of austerity, years of cuts to our public services and welfare. And to deflect the blame away from themselves, they've whipped up this vicious, hostile environment with deportations from the Windrush generation to asylum seekers and refugees, the intensification of anti-terror laws and the widening of Prevent at that, the passport checks in the NHS, It's created a situation where the real anger of people in society over falling wages and living standards is being channeled by the state and the mainstream media towards migrants and minorities, and pulled by the right, as we saw Tommy Robinson tried to do in the last year or so. Obviously, if we're talking about Tommy Robinson, he's failed and returned to obscurity. And it's important to note that that was because of different working class forces, from trade unions to community and political groups, mobilising every single time his supporters tried to take to the streets. And revolutionary socialists were absolutely at the heart of that united front. But the anger in society can also be pulled to the left. I think Corbyn can win in the next general election if he delivers a radical manifesto that offers a different alternative to austerity, just like he had in 2017, a manifesto that puts class, social and economic issues at the heart of it, with a commitment to ending the hostile environment and the brutal immigration controls that means 39 people died in a refrigerated container only 2 weeks ago or so. But in order to see that, what we do matters, and we should be organising in our workplaces and our schools and communities to mobilise that anger against the Tories and get rid of them on the 12th of December. But I'd like to say, while this election is absolutely important, we know by now that who you have in power still isn't enough to get rid of racism completely in society. We can see that, for example, with the election of Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States. Despite the fact that he was the first black president, and people rightly so celebrated this, that under him, you saw the most police killings of black people than any other president. And let's not forget, Donald Trump followed the presidency of Barack Obama. And actually, when Donald Trump built the wall on the border with Mexico, the reality is that there was a fence that Obama had put up before that. Or you look at people like Sajid Javid or Priti Patel. It doesn't matter their identity, they're just as nasty and dangerous as their white Tory counterparts. The reality is, it doesn't matter who we have in power or what their interests are. Racism isn't an idea in people's head that then materialises. Racism is absolutely rooted in the system that we live in, capitalism, in order to weaken those who it seeks to exploit. And this really begins with the Atlantic slave trade, where people are stolen from Africa and forced to work on plantations and racialized and made subhuman in order to justify their slavery. And in places like the United States where this happened, you can see the legacy of slavery and the mass incarcerations of African Americans. And its militarized prison system, which actually holds 25% of the world's prison population. This is a reality that continues today. With every form of racism that emerges, you can see how it constantly fits the agenda of the ruling classes at the time. Today, the newest and most widespread form of racism is Islamophobia, absolutely fostered by Western ruling classes in order to legitimize their all-grabbing war on terror and consistent interference in the Middle East, consistent interference in the Middle East. I think what you can see is that we can make some gains under capitalism. That can't be denied at all. You can see that in the struggle for civil rights in America, or here, the gains made by the anti-racist movements, for example, in the 60s and 70s against the National Front, by actually organising Afro-Caribbean communities in places like South London and Asian youth in places like East London against the fascists, trying to drive them out of those areas. But the system will always, in particular when it's in crisis, roll back on these gains. And we see old forms and new forms of racism re-emerge again and come to the fore. That is what we're seeing again today. But it's not all doom and gloom. Everywhere you're seeing that neoliberalism has failed. And everywhere you look, there's deep-rooted social and economic anger at the ruling class and the establishment, whether that's in Chile, whether that's in Lebanon, whether that's in Bolivia. But you can also see through those uprisings how the working class is bigger and has bigger potential than before. I'm a revolutionary socialist because I share that anger with those people, whether that's from the streets of Beirut or the streets of Santiago. But more than that, I want to get rid of the system that means a small minority hold the wealth produced by the overwhelming majority. I want to get rid of the system that produces racism to oppress some of us in order to exploit and divide all of us. And to do that, I think we need to be organised. And if you agree with me, I think you should think about joining the SWP in the course of this weekend, because the possibility to change the world and society is greater than before. But that won't happen unless we fight for it. Thank you.
Hello, welcome. First of all, my name is Ira Bundy, and it's nice to meet you all. I work for an organisation called Love Music, Hate Racism. We are the child of this organisation called Rock Against Racism, which was on during 1976 to 1982, I believe. Basically, what we do is that we use music and musical activists and artists as a way to combat far-right racist rhetoric and to bring together communities, because we fundamentally believe that there is more that unites us than divides us. We run events throughout the country, throughout the year, and we try to have a presence at as many festivals as we possibly can. Last March, we had this thing called the Beautiful Resistance, where we were going to schools and running events with so many different artists like George Smith, the Idols, many artists. And then over summer we had a carnival float which was just massively successful. It was such a good time, which we run yearly. And if you are ever in Notting Hill for carnival and know how crazy it gets, you need to find us and join us, because I promise you it is one of the best parties with a purpose that you will find all year round. In fact, on the 3rd of December, in association with Stand Up to Racism and R3, we're going to have a stage down at Trafalgar Square where we're going to say fuck Trump, fuck Boris, and fuck the far right. So I won't keep you too long, because this was ever so slightly sprung on me. But I will just say thank you to all of you who are in attendance, and I hope you look us up on social media and try and follow the work that we're doing, and please get involved in any way that you can. Thank you all.
Thank you. I want to start off by thanking everybody for coming to this meeting and saying, why are we here? Why are we actually here in this room talking about whatever it is? What we're actually talking about is the way forward for humanity. Because at the moment, when people say to us, I'll tell you how I got here. I went to a place called, I went to Poland last week to a place called Auschwitz, where millions of people were murdered. They were black, they were gay, they were Jewish, they were young, old, they were socialists, they were communists, and they were murdered in their thousands. And we used to have a slogan which was never again. And anybody who's read any of those history of that would say that couldn't possibly happen again. And I grew up with Holocaust survivors. I went round with Holocaust survivors. I went round with a man called Leon Greenman, who was an Englishman who happened to be living in Holland, and he was taken to Auschwitz, and they took away his kids, and his kids were hanging on to him, please daddy, and he watched them go over to the gas chamber and get murdered. And I remember him saying to me that if you've ever had that happen to you, you would do absolutely anything to make sure that happened never again. Now, you see, the reason why I'm raising this is because when you look around at the world now, you see the same types of figures like Hitler and like Mussolini starting to rise. And when we say never again, they've just waited for a generation that cannot describe what happened to start to repeat what they've done now. And it matters what people do. People keep saying Hitler was inevitable, Mussolini was inevitable. There was nothing inevitable about the Holocaust. Those people could have been stopped. There were revolutions inside Germany. There were struggles in Spain. They could have all have worked. There was an element that was missing. The element of missing was leadership. And I don't apologize for saying how great it is important that people make a difference. I'll tell you a story. I was in here when I was about your age in this room. And I was in here because they were telling us whether we could go to LSE, we could go to SOAS or Birkbeck or whatever it is. And you know what they were looking for? They said the average grade we're looking for is 2 C's and a B. This might not mean much to you, right? But I bet you in here, if anybody wanted to go to Russell Group University now, they'd ask you for 4 A's and maybe 16 A's on top of that, 16 pluses. And you danced on one foot and played violin backwards, yeah? They would have done that. What's happened? And when I came in this room, they said, it's easy for you to go to university because we're going to give you a grant, right? And we're going to, because you come from a working class background, you've got no money. I thought, oh, okay. In fact, we're worried about you. If you come out of London, we're going to give you 4 travel allowances so you can travel on the train. And we're going to give you a special grant for looking around the world so you can travel and see things. Yeah? And while you're there, we're going to give you housing support because you need it. This isn't another country. This isn't a virtual reality, different universe, different verses. This was Britain, UK, less than 30 years ago. What's happened? I tell you what's happened. We've been robbed. And when we've been robbed by neoliberalism, an idea where you make the rich rich. And they said, when you make them rich, they said the wealth will trickle down. All right? That's what happened. They called it trickle-down economics. I tell you what happened. They drank champagne and pissed down on us. That's what happened, yeah? Your house went. First the houses went. We'll sell off the housing. I've got people now, I went around knocking on their door saying, my kids can't get houses because of immigrants. Your kids can't get houses, nothing to do with immigrants, because they sold 5 million council houses off. The Tories did it 30 years ago. You just don't remember, and you're blaming the wrong people. And they use that. And actually, one of the things that Marx said, he said the ruling ideas in any society are the ideas of the ruling class. That's what they are. And when I think the return of Marx is really useful, because it begins to explain the global mess that we're in, that the ideas they're put in aren't the answer to what we're doing. That's the reason when we say socialist ideas, it's of trying to explain how we live now. And I think we've got a task in front of us, and that's to avoid extinction. I think that it's been, according to the historians, there's 200,000 years of human history in which we've lived in organised groups. In that 200,000 years, we've now reached a point where we can actually destroy the planet. And we can have, and my biggest fear is Nazis with nuclear weapons. That's one of my biggest fears. You can look down it, you can see them destroying the planet. I don't know if people read the FT last week, they said that the onion production failed in India twice because of monsoons. It's a staple diet of people and it's failed. As they were discussing in Venice why climate change wasn't affecting them, the council chamber was flooded by what's taking place. In other words, many of the people who now run our society have no idea about explaining it. Let's go further, all right? Let's look at the rulers, Boris Johnson. I mean, Boris Johnson's the proof that you can be both an idiot and an arsehole at the same time and still achieve something, yeah? That's his achievement. Idiot, racist, sexist, homophobic arsehole, but he's there. Why is he there? He's there because of class privilege. If any of us did any of that stuff, we'd go to prison. I'll give you an example. He said, did you take cocaine? I sneezed. If you said, I took cocaine, you wouldn't say, I want to be the next Prime Minister. People say, you're going to HMS. Yeah, which prison are you going to? Brixton? Or whatever, you're going to prison. That's where you're going to go. Take Michael Gove, who wrote the book 4-5 Fahrenheit thing. I apologise for once taking coke and taking crack. I was misguided. I'd like to be the next Chancellor. Right? Imagine some kid from Hackney. I'd like to be next Chancellor. Yeah, I did this a couple of times ago, but let me go. Let me be the next Chancellor. Yeah, they would never get away with it. You know that. I know that. We all know that. They'd never get away. People will say to them, something's wrong. People would be angry. They'd come on television. They'd be angry. This guy thinks he can do that. That's because the way they run society is always to apologise for themselves. And the reason why the problem is finding the truth is also hidden. I tell you what's amazing is one of the things that are amazing is the question of anti-Semitism. Take the RDG group, or take Rees-Mogg. I really agree with Stormzy. He's a piece of shit. When he said it's put perfectly, I couldn't put it, but you don't need to be a rap. That's perfect poetry. He's a piece of shit. If you want to understand capitalism, how is it that firefighters, people that go to rescue you, are to blame for what happened at Grenfell? That tells you how much they can twist and turn the lies about what's happening. And we have to understand the way that they do this. Grenfell happened because it was £5,000 cheaper to wrap them in cardboard than it was to put fire-resistant thing. Now, if you did it in Buckingham Palace and it burned down, the fire wouldn't be out before they're trying to arrest people, because it's about protecting their class, and they do it again and again and again. And we have to understand that once you understand that, you have to talk about how we can change it. There's nothing inevitable about the destruction of our planet, about the rise of fascism, about being defeated. How do I know this? When I was growing up, there was an organisation called the National Front. When I used to come out of school, they used to be selling a newspaper called Bulldog. And they were everywhere. They were in your school. They were absolutely everywhere, pushing racist ideas, dividing black and white. And actually, I used to put my anorak up, look down, because I just felt, this world is finished for us. These people are coming third in the election. Then along came a mass movement. And by the way, I was 12 years old when I joined the mass movement. And you know who led the first bar of Wood Green? Jeremy Corbyn. This is the guy they're calling anti-Semite, against mugging and against the Jews taking over. That's what the National Front organised the march in Wood Green. I have to be very, very proud, as members of the Socialist Workers' Party came out, teachers came out and said, we're going to stop this group. And he said, yeah. How are you going to stop them? We're going to turn around, we're going to physically block them doing that. Not only that, we have an idea of uniting black and white and undermining their ideas. They had theory, they had practice, they had action. They worked with people from the Labour Party. But at the end of the day, they were the core part of the leadership of trying to explain how to do that. And I actually thought we were going to be defeated, but we won. And victory is very important. The question of power and how you change a society is important. And that was done by individuals like yourselves who led that didn't accept that they were going to be used as voting fodder for what's taking place. And I just think that when we talk about this, think about the horsemen of war that ride. Every year there's a war in which people are killed and murdered. And every year we're told that the reason why we have these wars is in order to keep us safe. I remember them saying they're weapons of mass destruction inside Iraq. Do you know how many people they've killed inside Iraq? 1 million people have died since then. This is the land of peace. And I remember them saying to the Kurds, we're going to war because they gassed the Kurds. Have you seen what they've just done to the Kurds? In other words, they use imperialism to divide and rule. Do you mean, I come from a place, my family comes from a place called Jamaica. And there's a part of my family comes from a place called Maroon Town. Maroon Town, they led an uprising against the British. And the motto of them was never trust the British. All right, never trust them. Yeah, shake hands, but count your fingers. That's not. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be anti-British. I'm just saying to you, right, that the British ruling class were the biggest imperialists around the world, murderers, and therefore you shouldn't trust them. And actually, who did they use? They used working class people to do it. Actually, they took people from Scotland in order to fight that war after they'd taken over the Highlands. In other words, they used divide and rule all the time. And for us, when we talk about resistance and when we talk about the centrality of the working class, why do we do that? Why do we say that? And I know what's difficult, actually, a lot of the times is you're starting to see it. Why did they try and stop the post office from going on strike? It was just about money and capital. If the post office went on strike, it was more than that. It was about power and where resources come from inside our society. I got won to the idea of workers' power by watching the resistance of people. I watched the resistance of the miners, which happened a long, long time ago. But when I was your age at university, I remember there was a dockers' strike, a boat strike, and the dockers, somebody went on strike on a boat, and the police said, we're going to starve them off the ship, and we're going to close the dock. The dockers said, we're not doing that. We don't want to watch those people starve. So they went to the supermarket, and they went to bring them food. They called the police. The police surrounded the people delivering the food and said, you're all under arrest. But in Hull, where I was, Hull is the main port for North Sea oil. So the dockers turned off the oil, the gas thing. You saw the thing going round and round and round, turned off the gas. Do you know what happens if all the gas gets turned off in Britain? You know what happens? People go cold, but they also lose profits, yeah? So then a telephone call came in on the radio to the police officer, the inspector, and he turned around to the dockers and said, you're all been de-arrested, yeah? Where did the de-arresting come from? It came from power. And I understood that. As a student, I thought, that's power. That's the ability to change society. But imagine that manifolded on a maximum size. That's what working class power is. We don't see it all the time, but it's an ability to just push back the other side. The other experience I saw was I was told, I had the fortunate to go to a place called Indonesia, where there had been a revolution. And the revolution was led by dentists. There's not the people you'd normally expect to lead a revolution. But these dentist students came out because Suharto was a dictator and they wanted to get rid of him. So they marched all the way down to the parliament. Normally, people shoot people who do this. There's no kind of care, and there's brutal reality of the state. The soldiers turned around and said, there are too many people. So we can't do that. So they didn't shoot them. So the potential for change is there. So that's what we really want to build. We want to change the way our society is. And why are you here? I tell you, one of the reasons why you're here is because the question of being able to change that, you need individual leaders. I mean, most of the time we're being told, do as you're told. They train people to tell you to do as you're told. The only time you change things is when you don't do as you're told. How do we know this? How did women get the vote? They didn't do as they were told. How did the civil rights happen? They woke up one day, Martin Luther King said, I better do as I'm told. No, he said, I better do as I'm not told, and went and organised with people. What happened for LGBT rights, the Stonewall riots? LGBT people got up and said, are we going to do as we're told? They said, no, we're not going to do as we're told. The question is, why isn't all that together concentrated in an intellectual, organised, political way in order to make sure the people that don't want to do as they're told, and by the way, we're the majority, the 1% are the minority, why don't those people get together and say to those other people, actually, we don't want to destroy the planet. I'm not interested that much in nuclear war, and I'd like to reduce my hours of life and stuff like that and spend it doing something more enjoyable. Why doesn't that happen? Two things, opportunity and organisation. When the opportunity arises, it happens spontaneously. You don't plan it. The revolutions happen spontaneously. They're not planned. The organisation is separate from that. And that's what we're trying to do. When the opportunity arises, the organisation needs to be there. Now, there's some great things about getting older, right? One of the great things about getting older is you hear the same lies over and over again. How many people here have seen The Lion King? I've seen all three versions, yeah? And the reason why I say that is, each time it comes, it's the same story, isn't it, yeah? And that's a little bit like what reformism is. You hear this story, we're going to change everything. Everything's going to change. Lemonade is going to come flowing through your taps and whatever it is. And I want to be honest with you, that I would love to see, you know what I'd love to see? I'd love to see Jeremy Corbyn and Diane Abbott inside. That would be a good Christmas present, because I know every single Tory will be crying. They'll be crying and waiting. The rich are going to leave. Goodbye. We're taking your money. They keep telling us that's a threat. The rich are going to leave. We're taking your money and you can go. That's what we should say. Off you go. You didn't make it, you didn't earn it, it's ours. So the question is, we do have to reverse that, because if we don't, you know what the alternative is. Tommy Robinson endorsed Boris Johnson. That's what he did. Why did he endorse Boris Johnson? Because now there's an alliance between Johnson, Brexit Party and the Tories that all lead to a situation where they all support themselves, divide and rule their politics. They're trying to do that all the time. And we have to be what I describe as the politics of hope. You know, when Extinction Rebellion blocked the road, I was on there. And I remember the police coming up and they were scratching their head like Lauren Hardy. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? They keep not doing what? I think, more. We want more of it. We want more and more and more, because unless we get more and more, we won't get change. And that requires the history, I call, of the last 100 years of socialism, of challenging and looking at what's worked and what's not worked, and understanding, going beneath the surface appearance of society. You know, when people say to become a revolutionary, it's easy, you sign the form. At the end of this meeting, I want anybody who's not a revolutionary to sign the form. Very straightforward, you fill in it, direct debit, done, right? That's the easy bit, yeah? The hard bit is when you have to train and work with other people. I remember going home, becoming a revolutionary, going home to my parents. They said, what did you learn this year? Well, I actually joined the Socialist Workers' Party. Cutlery drops. Do you know what I mean? What the hell's going on? Yeah? My mum was a nurse. I worked all my life, child. There you go. You turned a fool when you went out. As soon as you start working with all these kind of people, what's wrong with you? Right? Actually, the first thing you face is resistance from very people around you, who turn around and say, why don't you conform? If you conform, you'll change things. Or they say to you, you can change things yourself, but you become the leader, yeah? Black faces in high places. A good example for me is a man called Trevor Phillips. Anybody heard of him? When I knew Trevor Phillips, he was at university, he was a firebrand. He used to turn around afterwards and say, you're too soft. I want to take everything. All you want to do is change everything, yeah? Now you see Trevor Phillips pushing racism. dividing and using the most disgusting Islamophobia, working with those people in order to do it. In other words, he didn't change the system, he got changed because his method didn't work. And the method, I think, is organising revolutionaries trying to connect with other people. And then, but also having a vision about where you're going to go. So I think the first thing, we need analysis. I recommend that people read Capital. And I'm not just saying that for any reason. We have deep theory. We have a philosophy. It takes years to master it. But when you apply it, it works. Jedi mind tricks, right? But it actually works. You can defeat the right. I saw a man called Nick Griffin crying in Barking and Dagenham. You know why he's crying? He was like, literally goes, I can't understand it. We were doing so well. And then along came all these people that broke us up. That wasn't an accident. It was Marxist in action. That's what it was, in terms of being able to change the world that we live in. And I think, but we do face a problem. We have to change it in a much bigger way. And I think every individual has to be developed as both a leader and at the same time being able to relate to the masses. That's what you're in here to do. We are not slaves. We are not going to just be wage slaves, no matter how talented we are or whatever it is. We have to have a vision of a better world for future generations so that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse don't get their ability to do what they do, because we can change it. And we can change that if we build a socialist society, but we have to build it in such a way as to deal with all the hardship before and to apply that in order to build the type of organisation that we need. In other words, if we build a revolutionary organisation, we will take advantage of the opportunities that come before us and we will change our world. The alternative, there is no alternative. Extinction Rebellion has proved that. There is no alternative other than to change our world, because the system that we live under, capitalism, which has not always been there, is a system that can be changed, but we have to do the changing.